Everything started with a piercing howl that sent a chill down my spine. I stopped in my tracks, holding my breath. The forest had been eerily silent just moments ago, but now something was stirring. The kind of movement that told you one thing: danger was near. I had spent enough time out here to know that when the wolves called out like that, something was happening. A hunt, a kill, or worse. My boots crunched softly against the frozen leaves as I moved forward, scanning the ground. That's when I saw it. Dark stains splattered across the frostbitten earth. Blood, and it wasn't old. I knelt down, touching the damp crimson with my fingers. Fresh, maybe minutes old. The prints leading away were uneven, frantic. Whatever had bled here had been running for its life. I followed the tracks, my heartbeat picking up as the air grew heavier. The trees pressed in on me, the branches gnarled and bare, stretching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. Then, just ahead, movement. My gut clenched. There it was. A bear cub, small, barely a few months old, its fur matted with blood. Alone. That's when I knew. Its mother wasn't coming. The cub stumbled forward, its tiny legs trembling under its weight. It wasn't used to running like this. It shouldn't have been alone out here. But the forest didn't care about should. It only cared about survival. And the wolves knew it. I heard them before I saw them. Soft footfalls, barely audible, circling. Their low growls slithered through the trees, calculating. They weren't in a hurry. They had their prey right where they wanted it. The cub whimpered, turning in a slow, confused circle. It smelled them, felt them, but it didn't know where to run. There was no mother to guide it, no towering presence to fend off the attackers. Just a small, defenseless thing standing on the edge of a death it couldn't even understand. I should have left. I should have turned around and walked away. This wasn't my fight. It wasn't my place. The rules of the wild were simple. Predators hunted, prey ran, and nature took its course. But my feet didn't move. I stood there, frozen, watching as the first shadow emerged from the underbrush. A wolf, then another, and another. 5 in total, sleek and starving. Their yellow eyes locked onto the cub, their bodies moving in perfect, ruthless sync. The cub let out a desperate, pitiful cry. And that was when I knew. I couldn't just stand there. The moment the cub realized what was happening, instinct took over. It turned on wobbly legs and bolted, crashing through the underbrush in a desperate attempt to escape. But it wasn't fast enough. It wasn't strong enough. And the wolves knew it. The pack moved with terrifying precision. They didn't lunge in all at once. No, they were smarter than that. They fanned out, their lean bodies slinking through the trees, cutting off every possible escape route. The cub veered left, but a gray wolf was already there, baring its teeth. It jerked right, but another blocked its path, growling low and steady. There was no way out. I could feel my own breath quicken. This wasn't just a hunt, it was a game. The wolves were toying with the cub, stretching out the chase, savoring the fear. They weren't just hungry, they were cruel. The cub tripped over an exposed root and collapsed into the dirt, chest heaving, paws scrambling. It let out a panicked whimper, but that only made the wolves more eager. The largest one, a dark-coated alpha, took a slow, deliberate step forward, licking its chops. It was over. I gripped the knife at my belt. Useless. There were 5 of them and one of me. Charging in would be suicide. But walking away, pretending I hadn't seen this, that wasn't an option either. The cub, realizing it was trapped, tried one last desperate move. It lunged to the side, throwing itself into a thick patch of ferns, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But the wolves had anticipated that. One of them, a lean, scarred male, pounced just as the cub moved. Its jaws snapped shut, barely missing the cub's back leg as the little bear tumbled forward, rolling down a small incline. The pack hesitated for a second, adjusting their approach. That second was all the cub had. It hit the ground running, bursting into the clearing below. The wolves were right behind it, closing the distance in mere heartbeats. I took a step forward, fists clenched, knowing I had to do something, anything. And then, everything changed. A sound shattered the chaos. Not a growl, not a whimper, a deep, guttural roar that rolled through the trees like thunder. The wolves froze. The cub skidded to a halt. Even I felt my stomach drop. Something else was out there. Something big. And it wasn't happy. The roar tore through the trees like a shockwave, shaking the very air around us. The wolves hesitated, ears flattening, their predatory confidence flickering. They had been the hunters just moments ago, playing their cruel game with the cub. Now they weren't so sure. The cub, still trembling, instinctively shrank back, its wide eyes darting toward the source of the sound. It knew whatever was out there was far beyond anything it had encountered before. Then the trees parted. At first, I thought it was another bear, a full-grown adult, maybe the cub's mother, somehow alive and returning just in time to rip these wolves apart. But as the figure emerged, I realized how wrong I was. It was a bear, yes, but not the one we expected. This was an old male, massive, his coat thick and scarred from a lifetime of battles. His left ear was torn, and one of his eyes bore a deep claw mark that had long since healed. He wasn't here for the cub. He wasn't here for vengeance. He was here for his own reasons, and none of them had anything to do with mercy. The wolves knew it too. The alpha let out a sharp, warning bark, as if trying to gauge whether this old beast would actually engage. The bear's answer came in the form of another deafening roar. This time, not just a warning, but a challenge. And that was all it took. The pack scattered, not in a chaotic frenzy, but in a calculated retreat. They weren't foolish enough to take on a full-grown male bear alone. The alpha snarled one last time before turning and disappearing into the brush, his pack right behind him. Just like that, the cub was no longer prey. But that didn't mean it was safe. The old bear stood there, his breathing slow and steady, watching the wolves disappear. Then his heavy gaze shifted to the cub. The little one had pressed itself against the ground, frozen in place. It wasn't running. It wasn't even breathing. I held my breath, watching. The bear took one slow step forward, then another. The cub flinched, its body tensing as if expecting the worst. And then, something impossible happened. The old bear huffed and turned away, not with aggression, not with anger, just indifference, as if he had done what he needed to do, and now the cub's fate was no longer his concern. And with that, he lumbered back into the forest, vanishing into the shadows. The cub stayed where it was, too shocked to move. And I stood there, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The forest was quiet again, but the air still felt heavy. The old bear had vanished into the shadows, his presence lingering like a ghost. The cub remained frozen in place, still too afraid to move. Its small chest rose and fell rapidly, its body trying to process what had just happened. The wolves were gone. The threat had passed, but the world hadn't suddenly become safe. I exhaled slowly, trying to make sense of it all. Why had that old bear interfered? It wasn't protecting its own cub, it didn't have one. That much was clear. The scars on its body, the way it moved. That bear had been alone for a long time. It was a survivor, not a caretaker. Yet something had made it step in. I crouched down, watching the cub. It was still in danger, still alone. The wolves might return, or another predator could take their place. Out here, the weak didn't last long. And make no mistake, this cub was weak. Too young to hunt, too small to fight, and now, without a mother. I had seen what happened to orphans in the wild before. The outcome was never good. The cub finally moved. Its legs were unsteady, its body swaying slightly. It sniffed the air, searching, hoping. But there was nothing left to find. Its mother was gone. The old bear wasn't coming back. And I wasn't sure if I should either. I knew better than to interfere with nature. Everything had its way of working out, even when it seemed cruel. But something about this cub, something about the way it had fought, the way it had refused to give up even when the odds were against it. It reminded me of something, or someone. I clenched my jaw, pushing the thought away. This wasn't my problem. The bear had done its part. The rest wasn't up to me. And yet, I took a step closer. The cub flinched, eyes darting toward me. Fear. Hesitation. It didn't know whether I was another threat or something else entirely. I raised my hands slightly, a meaningless gesture. It had no reason to trust me, but it didn't run. Not yet. The wind shifted, rustling the trees, carrying the scent of something distant. The cub's ears twitched. Its instincts told it to move, to survive. Even without a mother, even without protection, it would keep going, because that was the only choice it had left. I watched as it took a shaky step forward, then another, heading deeper into the forest. Alone. I should have let it go. I should have turned around and walked away. But I didn't. Not yet. The forest didn't forget. Neither did the wolves. I could feel them watching, hidden behind the trees, slinking through the undergrowth, always just out of sight. They weren't gone. They were waiting. The old bear had scared them off, but it hadn't erased their hunger. Wolves didn't abandon prey that easily, especially not after a failed hunt. They were patient. They would follow, track, and when the right moment came, they would strike again. And the cub? It had no idea. It kept moving, its tiny body pushing forward, unaware of the eyes locked onto it from the shadows. It was alone, but it wasn't free. Not yet. I should have left. I had done enough standing around, watching nature unfold in all its brutal indifference. The world had its rules, and I wasn't supposed to interfere. But I did. I followed. Not close enough to startle it. Just enough to see where it would go. Just enough to be there if, when the wolves came back. The cub moved slower now, exhaustion wearing on its small frame. Every few steps, it paused, sniffing the air, ears twitching at the faintest sound. It wasn't just tired, it was scared. It knew something was wrong, even if it didn't understand what. Then suddenly it stopped. Its nose lifted, catching a scent carried by the wind. Something familiar, something comforting. It let out a soft whimper and changed direction, picking up speed. My chest tightened as I realized what it was doing. It was looking for her, the mother it would never find. I clenched my fists, swallowing down whatever emotion had started to creep up my throat. This was the reality of the wild. Loss didn't mean stopping. It meant moving forward, even if you didn't know where you were going. But the wolves knew exactly where they were going. A flicker of movement in the trees. A pair of yellow eyes reflecting the dim light. Then another, and another. They were still here, still waiting. I exhaled slowly. If the cub kept moving, maybe it had a chance. Maybe it could get far enough before they grew bold again. Or maybe it wouldn't. I didn't know why this mattered so much to me. It wasn't my problem. It wasn't my fight. And yet, I was still standing there, still watching, still unable to turn away. I had a choice to make, and I already knew what it was. The cub disappeared into the trees. I stood there unmoving, watching as its small shape melted into the shadows. It never looked back. Maybe it knew I was there. Maybe it didn't care. Either way, it was on its own now. And the wolves? They followed. I saw them slipping between the trunks, quiet, efficient. They wouldn't rush. They'd wait for the right moment, for the cub to slow down, for exhaustion to finally win. Then they'd finish what they started. That was nature. That was how it worked. But this time, I didn't let it. I moved, fast, without thinking, without questioning. I stepped forward, breaking a branch under my boot, making just enough noise for the wolves to hear. Their heads snapped toward me, eyes flashing with something between curiosity and irritation. I wasn't supposed to be part of this equation. And yet, here I was. I took another step, then another, not charging, not threatening, just existing in the space between them and their prey. One of them let out a low growl. Another shifted its weight, uncertain. The pack wasn't afraid of me, not really. But they were hunters, and hunters didn't waste energy on unknown risks. For a long moment, we stared at each other. A silent standoff, a test of patience. Then, just like that, the wolves made their choice. One by one, they turned. Silent, swift, disappearing into the dark. They weren't giving up. They were just choosing something easier. something that didn't fight back. And the cub? It was gone. I didn't know if it would survive. I didn't know if it had the strength, the instincts, the luck to make it through the night. Maybe the cold would take it. Maybe another predator would. Or maybe, just maybe, it would keep going. I'd never know. And maybe that was the point. Not everything had an answer. Not every story had an ending. Sometimes, things just happened. Sometimes, against all odds, something small and fragile made it through the dark. And that was enough.